welcome to my tent, a place to hear life experiences, different opinions, a range of journeys, and a viewpoint different than our own. A place to challenge our own thoughts, a space to learn a little bit, and I promise some fun along the way. I believe we're better when we let a range of people into our tents, so welcome to mine. Good morning, everybody, or good evening, good afternoon, whenever you may be listening to this episode. We have a solo episode today, and this has actually been requested a few times for me to talk about because my experience with breastfeeding after I had my son was a very unique set of challenges. I think many people have challenges or a rocky road in terms of their breastfeeding journey. So I'm going to talk about mine. Before we get into that, just a little life update as I've been doing in some of these solo episodes. We are officially in the final month of Ronan being under a year old. He turned 11 months old on May 13th, and his birthday is going to be coming up next, which is absolutely insane. If you can hear, I am nasally and congested, which I will most likely cringe when I listen to this back, hearing what my voice sounds like, but it is what it is because Ronan has gotten the entire house sick again from daycare. And that in itself is such a challenge. I will be talking about this probably in a future episode of trying to balance work and life and a kid that consistently brings home 75 different varieties of illnesses. But right now we're just trying to work through whatever he's given us all that is gross. So that's that. We are definitely on the mend though, which is good. Getting back into the swing of things getting a little crazy again. We have some trips coming up, and this past weekend was Mother's Day. We celebrated with my family, and we have some actually fun vacations that are going to be coming up on the docket. In the next few months, we're trying to escape Phoenix when we can during the summertime. I will say I'm a little bit nervous to live here in the summer. Weird flex that I live here because I don't like the heat. So people are probably asking themselves why I decided to move here, but you know, it's a trade-off. Chicago winters are brutal, and it can be in the negatives for a couple months, and then you have that gray and sleety and gross situation sometimes until even June. So, you know, it's a trade-off. But anyway, that's a little bit of my life update, and we can get into the actual content of this episode, and that is my journey with breastfeeding. So I do want to note that this is my experience, and this is the only story I know how to tell because it's the only one that I lived through. But my journey was really unique in the sense that a severe oversupply of breast milk was actually what was really challenging for me. And I know that the majority of women that I talk to struggle with the exact opposite. So if this is an episode that's going to feel triggering to you when I'm talking about my supply, please, first and foremost, protect your own peace. This journey is hard enough without external stuff making us feel certain ways. So I do want to reference that before we get started. Also, something that I want to say, this is not an open forum to tell me what I should have done or tell me what I did was not the right thing. So with this, and I understand that when I open myself up in a public forum, whether it's posting on Instagram or releasing a podcast, people are always going to have their opinions. And my one ask, if you're listening to this, is to just stay open-minded that all of our experiences are incredibly different and challenging in different ways. And this isn't a space to come and say you should have done X, Y, and Z, or what you did was, I don't know, selfish. I have already been told these things. Anything that you can think of, I've most likely already been told. So that's just my one ask of everyone. So let's dive into the content of this. When I was pregnant, I didn't really have a strong feeling either way on breastfeeding versus not. But I knew I wanted to at least try. I knew I wanted to see what happened, give it a good go, and try to be gentle with myself as the process evolved. But I'm also not one to say there is only one way to do things and breastfeeding is the only option for me. And this is the best, because what I've learned throughout this whole experience is best can be very different person to person. And the expense of the mother also counts. And this is where sometimes people get a little snippy, I guess I can call it, with me saying that I ought to do what's best for my child, even though what was happening in my experience was by far taking an extreme mental and emotional toll on me and the mother that I wanted to be. What I've come to learn is you have to do what is best for your baby and for you, because if things are not giving you the space to show up as a mom because you're so gung-ho and hell-bent on breastfeeding, that could be something that will affect you and your child as well. And I'll definitely talk more about that and how that's layered in over the course of my experience with breastfeeding my son. When I gave birth, they immediately let me do skin to skin. We had that time together. And when it came time to try to breastfeed for the first time, the only people that were in there that were helping me were the labor and delivery nurses, which is amazing. And they're a wealth of knowledge. But looking back, I wish that I had a lactation consultant in there helping me with those first times, because I'm a first-time mom and I had absolutely no idea what I was doing. I didn't even know how to hold my baby properly to get him to latch. And it was going okay. It was really painful, which I wish I had spoken up a little bit more about. And it just felt very non-intuitive. And at the time I chalked it up to, okay, I'm a first-time mom. I'm sleep deprived. I'm overwhelmed. It will get better. It will come naturally. And every time that he needed to eat, I was filled with a lot of anxiety, wondering if I'm doing this correctly and if he's getting enough. And it was a definite challenging experience on top of recovering from a C-section and just generally feeling like WTF just happened because I had given birth. I ended up having a lactation consultant come into my room at one point. I believe it was the next day. I called them to come in because there was something that happened that from what I hear is actually kind of common. And I wasn't told that this could happen, but in the hospital, we had this second night syndrome thing where Ronan almost woke up a little bit from being born. That first day, he was so sleepy and he was so kind of like quiet. And that second day, he was like, okay, I'm here. What up? And that entire second night, he wanted to feed constantly, but would drink for 2 minutes and then be quiet for 5 and then scream and do it again and do it again. And I just remember sitting there having not slept for probably 18, 19 hours at this point and sobbing because I was so confused. I was so challenged. It didn't seem like what I was doing was working. When the sun finally broke and the nurse came into my room, I said, I really need an LC, a lactation consultant, to come in here and help me with this. So she comes in, and what I found was she was really pushy. She was really rough with me and my body and my baby. I was getting anxious, which translated to Ronan getting anxious. It still really hurt. And she felt really rushed. And I know that there's a million things wrong with the medical system and in general, but I felt really defeated in that moment because here I am thinking, okay, this professional, this lactation consultant is here to help me. And when she left, I almost felt more confused. At that point, they're monitoring Ronan and making sure that he is not losing too much weight. Losing a little bit is very common right after babies are born because they're used to getting 24/7 nutrition from you, and then they're outside the body and they drop in weight. But they were watching that closely. And it got to the point where we were on the edge of, okay, he's losing a little bit too much weight. What can we do? I wasn't against formula by any means, but I still really wanted to hear my options. And what they told me was that I could start pumping and see what I got out with a pump and then bottle feed him to at least know that he's getting nutrition. So they brought a pump in, they showed me how to use it, and then they left. Again, I'm a first-time mom. I have no idea what's normal, what's not normal, what's going on. So I hook myself up to this pump and I get, this is where things get crazy. And I, in retrospect, probably should have known something was up because I got 4 ounces on each side of colostrum, which is crazy. You're usually typically only making a couple drops or a couple ounces, maybe because your baby's belly is so tiny. They don't need a lot of nutrition at that point. They cannot take a lot of ounces at a single time because their system is so small. So the nurse comes in and was like, whoa, did you just pump all that out? And I said, yeah, that was just what happened. And she didn't even really make mention of it, that was definitely something that was an anomaly or not common. And here I am just thinking, go me, look at my body. This is incredible. What I learned in hindsight is that breastfeeding is a supply and demand process, meaning your baby will start to cue that they want to eat more, your breasts will make more milk, and that is how your supply goes up or down, depending on what your baby's needs are. When I started pumping, my body started to think that I needed to produce all of this milk and this colostrum. So in a way, it was great because I had all of this on hand. So I wasn't trying to breastfeed him and getting frustrated with that process. I knew that he was getting nutrition from this bottle because of this pumped milk. And I never saw the lactation consultant again. Nobody really told me what else to do other than how to hook myself up to a pump. And I was kind of left doing it on my own or Googling or asking friends. And that is the route that I basically took. I realized, or at least at the time, what I felt was working for us was I would pump and then know exactly how much milk Ronan was getting. And right off the bat, my supply came in fast and furious. I am talking right off the bat, I was producing the needs for a 1-year-old child immediately upon coming home. My son at that point was probably only needing about 20 ounces a day, and I was making 60 or 80. I had no idea what was normal, what was not normal. I had no clue what pumping could do to my body in terms of supply and demand. But I was now also making so much milk that I had to be tethered to this pump to be able to relieve myself. My boobs were engorged, and when I say they were rock hard and they were so uncomfortable at all times, I needed the relief, and I didn't really know what to do other than pump that milk out. And it didn't really matter how long I was pumping for. I was just rapidly producing, rapidly letting down, and within a 10-minute pump session was getting an exorbitant amount of milk. On one hand, it was great because we were banking it and putting it in the fridge and the freezer. I was very comforted knowing my son had food on hand. It's not lost on me, if you're listening to this and you were struggling with low supply, how stressful that would be on that end as well, because you're not making enough food for your baby. I was. And Duke was able to give him bottles, which was really helpful because I could either take a nap or I could do something. I wasn't physically tethered to my baby because he wasn't breastfeeding from my chest. So there were some bright spots within that, but my body started to really take the heat and feel the effects of how much milk I was producing. I will never forget the first time I got mastitis. If you don't know what mastitis is, it is when either there's a clog in one of your ducts or your production is causing things to get stuck, and a duct or part of the system that you're breastfeeding comes out of your chest from gets infected. You can get mastitis, which is an infection. And to put it lightly, it makes you feel like you have the absolute flu. I have never felt shittier in my entire life than when I had mastitis, but I'll never forget the minute that I felt like something was wrong, because I was in an Old Navy with my mom and I was looking at jeans, and all of a sudden I'm touching my boobs in public, which if anyone saw me doing that, I don't know what they thought, but I was like, this boob really hurts. It is extremely tender to the touch. It is burning. It feels horrible. I start my text chain of my girlfriends. I start to Google and realize that I think I have a clogged duct, and there's a lot of pressure and buildup. Pumping is not releasing the clog. Hand expressing is not releasing the clog. I am putting warm compress. I am milking myself like a cow, literally getting on all fours and connecting myself to this pump and trying to get this clog out. And nothing is working. I did that for about a full day, and I woke up the next day in high fever, full body chills. I was shaking uncontrollably, sweating, and then going into extreme cold spells. My boobs were on fire. My entire boob was red. I was trying to be so stoic because I didn't even really know what mastitis was. I had been Googling, but I'd never experienced this before. And God bless my mother, who first and foremost was there to be an extra set of hands. But she basically looked at me and said, stop trying to be so strong. You need to go get this evaluated. So I go to the doctor. We confirm mastitis. I get on meds, which luckily worked and were really helpful. But now I have this layer of the absolute terror and fear of getting mastitis again. So now every time I'm pumping, every time my boobs feel any slight tingle or feeling, I am going into a full spiral that I'm going to get mastitis again. Because when I was feeling that sick, I could not care for my child. My mom was there, which I thank my lucky stars for, because Duke and my mom were helping to tend to the baby. We had pumped milk in the freezer and the fridge so they could help feed him and make sure he was getting fed while I slept. But I felt terrible physically and terrible mentally that I was upstairs, curled into a ball with a heating pad, listening to other people take care of my child. And this is the first instance where I was like, is this worth my physical and mental health? All we hear is breast is best, breast is best. I am also not trying to debunk anything about breast milk. Breast milk is incredible. It has incredible antibodies, nutrition. It is coming directly from your body to your baby. There are gazillion benefits to breastfeeding. But what was starting to happen was my physical and mental health was rapidly declining. I was having to pump through this clog, sobbing as I'm tied to my pump. I could not leave the house for more than a few hours without leaking through all my clothing because I had so much milk that it was just bursting. So I would leak through my shirts despite wearing numerous nursing pads. I was anxious to leave the house. I was unable to actually go anywhere without my electric pumps. I basically was tied to my house and tied to my pump and tied to a wall with an outlet. I was foregoing time with my child because of how much I was having to pump just to keep up with what I was producing and that fear and anxiety that I would get mastitis again. I am very fortunate that I had insurance coverage to get a lactation consultant to come back to my house. She actually made a house call. And what I will say is I really wanted her to help me get my supply down. I wanted her to help me try to manage my supply. At this point, pumping was working for us. I was willing to exclusively pump, which is a big time commitment. but I could not keep up with the 120 ounces a day I was producing. Yes, 120. That is insane. That is more than twins need. That's more than triplets need. And when this woman came to my house, all she wanted to do was work on my baby latching and breastfeeding from my breast. And I was like, no, I am pumping. I like knowing how many ounces he's getting. I like my husband being able to help. I am frustrated with Ronan's latch. He doesn't seem to be liking it. He is uncomfortable. He is not getting what he needs. He is hungry. He is screaming. Can you please help me to get my supply down? She kind of brushed me off, and I found myself really frustrated when she left. This is where I get really sad about the medical system and how we are treating breastfeeding mothers, because I had all the access in the world. I had all of the privilege of seeing lactation consultants, of insurance, of a long maternity leave home with my son, and I still had trouble. I know people who are forced to go back to work within weeks of having their children, with no breaks to pump, no access directly to their child to breastfeed. I know people who don't have insurance or access to lactation consultants. The million ways we are set up to fail in this society is asinine. I was left so disheartened and discouraged that as someone with all the access in the world, I still failed. And I felt like a failure for myself and for my son. And I was not being the mom that I wanted to be. I was anxious. I was sleeping on towels at night. I was crying every time I pumped. My freezer ran out of room. We had to buy another freezer. Duke was constantly handling the baby, which is great that he had that bonding time with Ronan. But all I was doing was pumping. And all I was doing was having these invasive and anxious thoughts about my chest. I was in physical pain. I was in mental distress. And it was not worth it for me anymore. It just wasn't. I didn't know at the time that people could be so cruel about breastfeeding versus not. If you're listening to this and you're on your own journey, and this is something that a lot of people will not agree with me on, how you feed your child is a deeply, deeply personal choice. If you want to breastfeed for 4 years, go for it. Honestly, that is incredible. Kudos to you. You're a superhero. If you want to exclusively pump, if you don't want to breastfeed at all, it's a deeply, deeply personal choice. The expense of the mother counts. And this is where some people just hard stop don't agree with me, which makes me sad. Because I've had people tell me, you didn't have a baby to be selfish. The reason why I am so passionate about sharing my story is I was not just a little uncomfortable. I was very unwell. I was not showing up as I wanted to. I was confused. I was anxious. I was physically just in so much pain all the time that I felt like mothering was a secondary thing on my list when it should have been the first. I made the decision to start weaning off pumping, and that was a journey in itself as well, because I couldn't figure out how to simply get my supply down. I would have been happy to keep going if I could have gotten it down to a manageable amount and a manageable number of pumps per day. But every time that I would get it down slightly, I got mastitis. So it happened again. In my weaning journey, I was trying to get down on number of ounces I was producing in a given session and cutting that down slowly. And within a week, I got full-blown mastitis again, which honestly was the last nail in the coffin for me. I knew I could not do that again. I knew that that was just yet another thing taking me away from my son. It was hard on my marriage, to be quite frank. Duke was having to pick up a lot of the work, and Duke was trying his best to manage basically the mothering capabilities and the fathering capabilities because I was too busy sitting on the floor with a pump attached to the wall and crying. That second bout of mastitis was what really did it for me. And that's when I decided that I had to go all or nothing. And I hate this mindset in so many aspects of life where there are very few instances where I have actually said it is either X or Y. And for me, it was either continue to stay miserable and physically hurting and mentally unwell, or stop cold turkey. I ended up completely weaning and did this under a medical professional's care. So I won't actually go into everything that I did to dry my supply up because I am not a medical professional and I am not in your shoes in your exact situation. So I'm very cautious on giving any type of medical treatment or advice ever, but especially here because your body is unique to you. But that's what I ended up doing. I ended up cutting it off completely, not even trying to get my supply down to get mastitis again, but also knowing I had an entire freezer full of milk that Ronan would be able to drink and utilize, which I think made my decision to stop easier, knowing that there was few bright spots within this, one of them being the amount that I had saved. So I knew he was able to still get breast milk. And knowing that I was turning the corner to show up as the mom that I wanted to be. I also have nothing against formula at all. I think, like I mentioned, feeding your child is a deeply personal choice, and everyone has a different set of circumstances that are going to inch you towards the decisions that you make. Like the whole point of this podcast is our experiences are what drives our actions and our thoughts and our opinions. And I never had anything against formula. I went to it, in fact, and Ronan is now 100% on formula because he's consumed the milk that we had saved. But what I want to say is how someone else feeds their child is also none of your business. I would never tell a mother who is exclusively breastfeeding, you're doing it wrong. That is not up to me to decide. And everything with parenting is going to be a choice. If you do this, you cannot do that. And this was one of those times where I needed to get some of my life back. And what I was experiencing wasn't just a little quote unquote uncomfortable, as some people called it. It was wrecking me. It was destroying me. And my son was suffering because of that. He maybe wasn't suffering nutritionally, but he was suffering spending time with me. He was suffering me being an anxious, awful mess. My husband was suffering because I was not a good version of myself. I was suffering. And those are the choices that we all have the right to make. Doing something that felt aligned to me was one I grappled with, because showing up with those decisions confidently as a parent in general, but as a first-time parent, is scary because you don't know what's going to happen. You don't know the aftermaths of any of these decisions that you're going to make. What I will say is I made the right call. And that's something also that I've leaned into listening to, and this experience has taught me a lot, is our intuition with our own children and our own bodies can rarely lead us wrong. And I was looking into so much external validation when I was really struggling, trying to have someone tell me that I needed to keep going, or I needed to stop, or my baby should do this, or my baby should do that, cutting the noise out and doing what I felt was best aligned to me. This might get me into some hot water. Exclusively breastfeeding is an extremely privileged thing to be able to do. I don't say that lightly. I think there's just so much wrong with our society and lack of paid leave and lack of resources and lack of affordable healthcare. And it is an extremely privileged thing to be able to have access to your child for extended periods of time, to exclusively breastfeed them, or be in a profession that gives you the time to pump, or have access to a lactation consultant if you're suffering. There is a lot of work that needs to be done. And I do think that maybe my experience could have been different if we were not set up to fail the way that we do. Maybe if I had researched more or met with a lactation consultant before I gave birth, or done a little bit more on my end to set myself up for success, I would have had a different experience. I'll never know, because that's not how it panned out. And for all I know, my body was just overproducing like that, and it always would have been. We'll just have to live with that unknown. This is all to say that the choices that I made because of that had to come from a deeply aligned internal place. And with all of the information that we have now, and all of the access to social and websites and the technology highway that we live on, it is very hard to do that. But I want to encourage you, if you're going through this, to maybe sit with this decision for a few days and actually listen to what your gut is telling you, because it can rarely, I swear, lead you wrong. My son is thriving. He did get breast milk for 7 months almost, and I feel very proud of what I did and how long I was able to sustain that. But I have no issues that he's 100% formula fed at this point. He's almost done with formula, in fact, because he's almost 1. But I have no issues with the way that I did things, because I let myself also say, I matter. My mental health matters. My physical health matters. Because if I cannot get up to take my son for a walk because I'm trying so hard to be exclusively breastfed, am I really being the mom that I want to be? And that answer was no. I don't know if this is going to help anyone, as our experiences and journeys are all extremely unique. I want you to know that however you show up is a personal choice. And that doesn't mean it has to be the same as your friend or your sister. And we shouldn't care so much or be so quick to judge what someone else is doing. We should be supporting women that want to breastfeed. And that's stuff that I wish I had more solutions on. I wish I had better, I wish I could just tell the government and they would do it, to give better leave and better insurance and better support from others. If someone that you know is going through this, I encourage you to just tell them that they're doing a great job, and to listen to what they think is right, and encourage them on whatever path that takes. All right, I've given you a lot of details about my boobs. And if you're one of the 6 men that's listening and have made it this far, bless you. I hope you learned something. If you're also in this phase of life or have had a difficult journey with breastfeeding, I so see you. And I am encouraging you to do what is best for your entire unit, you, your baby, your family, and your intuition has got your back. If anyone else has questions or wants to chat about any of this, my DMs are always open. My emails are always open. And I hope that this gives you a little bit of insight into what this looked like for me and how that's panned out and how I've kind of viewed the whole thing. All right. Enough on my tits, guys. Love ya. Thank you for tuning in to the Welcome to My Tent podcast. I hope you had as much fun listening as I do recording. I am so happy to have you here, and see you next episode.